Fame was never built for truth. It was built for comfort, control, and illusion. In classic rock, desire had rules, masculinity had limits, and anything that crossed the line was hidden, denied, or quietly erased. Behind the leather jackets and screaming crowds, many icons lived double lives shaped by fear, contracts, and an industry that punished honesty. This is not about labels. This is about silence. 10 rock stars. 10 stories where identity became a liability and survival meant secrecy. Freddie Mercury. The icon who was never allowed to be honest, Freddie Mercury is often remembered as fearless, flamboyant, and limitless, but that freedom mostly existed on stage. Offstage, Freddie lived in an era where being openly gay could end a career overnight. The music industry didn't just discourage honesty, it punished it. As Queen rose to global fame, Freddie learned that ambiguity was safer than truth. His relationships with men were known within inner circles, yet carefully hidden from the public narrative. Interviews deflected, questions were shut down. Freddie mastered the art of revealing everything through performance while saying nothing in words. The mustache, the leather, the camp theatrics of the 80s weren't confessions. They were coded signals. The tragedy isn't that Freddie was gay. The tragedy is that he was never allowed to simply say it without consequence. The industry celebrated his excess, but feared his honesty. Even as AIDS rumors circulated, silence was enforced by contracts, PR teams, and cultural stigma. Elton John, famed before Freedom Elton, John's sexuality was an open secret, long before it was openly acknowledged. From the beginning, his flamboyance challenged rock's rigid masculinity, but openness was still dangerous. In the 1970s, being openly gay meant radio bans, lost sponsorships, and industry exile. Elton attempted honesty early, publicly identifying as bisexual in the 1970s, only to retreat under pressure. The backlash was immediate. His career survived, but the message was clear. Visibility came at a cost. For years, Elton lived between personas extravagant on stage, restrained off it. Addiction filled the space where authenticity couldn't exist. Cocaine, alcohol, and isolation became coping mechanisms in a world that profited from his image, but restricted his identity. Unlike many peers, Elton eventually reclaimed his truth, but not until decades of damage were done. When he finally came out as gay in the late 1980s, it wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Elton John's story isn't about secrecy. It's about delay, a life where honesty had to wait until success made him untouchable. Little Richard. The queer origin rock tried to erase Little Richard wasn't just part of rock history, he was its rupture. Before Elvis, before the Stones, before anyone else, Little Richard exploded onto the scene with makeup, flamboyance, high heels, and an openly queer presence that terrified 1950s America. His sexuality and gender expression were never subtle. They were confrontational. That visibility came at a cost. Religious pressure, industry fear, and cultural violence pushed him into cycles of suppression and retreat. At times, he publicly renounced queerness under evangelical influence, only to later reclaim it again. This wasn't confusion, it was survival. The industry wanted his sound, but not his truth. Rock borrowed his energy, sanitized it, and handed it to safer faces. Little Richard was celebrated as a pioneer while being denied full acceptance as himself. He wasn't secretly queer, he was forced into contradiction. His legacy isn't just musical, it's political. Rock didn't begin straight, it began queer and then tried to forget it. David Bowie declared retracted. Still, unresolved David Bowie publicly identified as bisexual in the early 1970s, a radical act that sent shockwaves through popular culture. Ziggy Stardust wasn't just a character, it was a challenge to fixed gender, sexuality, and identity itself. But as Bowie's fame expanded, his openness contracted. In later years, he distanced himself from the bisexual label, calling it a phase or media exaggeration. Whether this was personal evolution or industry pressure remains debated. What's undeniable is Bowie's impact. He normalized ambiguity. He made fluidity visible without demanding explanation. His retraction didn't erase his influence, it exposed the limits of acceptance even for icons. Bowie didn't offer clarity, he offered disruption. And in doing so, he gave future artists permission to exist between definitions of N if he himself stepped back from the line he first crossed. Lou Reed, Queer Lives. Without apology, Reed didn't hint at queerness, he recorded it. At a time when rock music avoided the subject entirely. Reed wrote openly about trans women, gay men, drag queens, and sexual outsiders living on society's margins. Walk on the Wild Side wasn't a metaphor. It was reportage. Reed himself never fit into a single label. He had documented relationships with both men and women and spoke openly about sexual fluidity long before it was culturally safe. But he resisted turning identity into spectacle. His work wasn't about confession, it was about visibility. The industry tolerated Reed because he didn't ask for approval. His songs were too influential to erase, even if their subjects made executives uncomfortable. He normalized queer existence, not through activism, but through presence. Lou Reed didn't present queerness as rebellion or tragedy. He presented it as fact. And that quiet honesty permanently shifted what rock music could talk about. Rob Halford, hiding inside the loudest armor. Rob Halford was the voice of Judas Priest, one of metal's most aggressive, masculine-sounding bands. Leather, chains, dominance, power. For decades, no one questioned it. That was the disguise. Halford lived as a gay man in silence while performing hypermasculinity on stage. The metal world wasn't safe. Homophobia was assumed. So he hid inside the very imagery that would later be recognized as queer-coded when Halford came out publicly in 1998. The shock wasn't that he was gay, was that metal had never seen it. Fans realized the genre's toughest aesthetic had always been more complex than it admitted. Halford didn't just survive the closet, he unknowingly reshaped metal's visual language from inside it. His story isn't about secrecy, it's about endurance. He proved that queerness didn't weaken metal. It had been there all along. Pete Townshend, confusion inside the spotlight. Pete Townshend spent much of his career wrestling with identity in public without ever fully resolving it. In interviews and writings, he openly acknowledged sexual confusion, same-sex experiences, and long periods of questioning at a time when such admissions could destroy a career. As the creative force behind The Who, Townshend built narratives about alienation, fractured identity, and inner conflict. These weren't abstract concepts, they mirrored his private struggles. Rock culture demanded certainty, masculinity, control. Townshend offered doubt. Rather than declare a label, he retreated into intellectualization. His honesty was fragmented, cautious, and often misunderstood. The industry preferred silence over complexity, and Townshend learned to speak carefully. His story isn't about secrecy in the traditional sense, it's about living in permanent ambiguity, never fully hiding, never fully free. Townshend showed that questioning itself could be a form of rebellion in an era that demanded clear answers. Janice Joplin, loving without permission. Joplin never fit the roles assigned to women in rockcore in life. She openly formed deep romantic and sexual relationships with both men and women, long before bisexuality had language or acceptance in mainstream culture. But freedom didn't mean safety. Janice was mocked, fetishized, and dismissed as unstable rather than understood. Her queerness wasn't celebrated, it was used against her. The industry tolerated her pain as long as it produced performances. Offstage, she searched desperately for love without conditions. On stage, she screamed what she was never allowed to live openly. Her sexuality wasn't a statement, it was instinctive, emotional, unfiltered. Janice Joplin wasn't hiding who she loved. She was surviving in a world that punished women for wanting too much freedom. Her tragedy wasn't excess, it was exposure without protection. Brian Jones' freedom that became a threat. Brian Jones was never built for containment. As the founding member of the Rolling Stones, he embodied excess, curiosity, and defiance musically, emotionally, and sexually. Biographies describe him as openly experimental, uninterested in fixed labels, and drawn to fluid identity long before the culture had language for it. But the industry demands predictability. Jones offered instability. His openness, ward, gender expression, sexuality, and altered states made him dangerous in a system designed to market clean rebellion. As the Stones hardened into a masculine commercial machine, Brian became expendable. Isolation followed success. His behavior was medicalized, mocked, and punished rather than understood. What made him different was reframed as weakness. Control replaced creativity. Brian Jones wasn't destroyed by indulgence alone. He was erased because he refused to compress himself into something manageable. His queerness, ambiguity, and refusal to conform made him the first casualty of a band that chose survival over truth. Mark Bolan, androgyny before permission. Mark Bolan didn't hint at gender ambiguity. He radiated it. Glitter, curls, soft vocals. cosmic fantasies, his presence dissolved. Traditional masculinity at a time when rock still clung to male dominance, Bolan openly played with bisexual imagery and implication, never confirming, never denying. That ambiguity was the point. He understood that desire was power and mystery was protection. Fans didn't need explanations, they felt permission, but glam was tolerated only as spectacle. When trends shifted, Bolan was pushed aside. The same industry that profited from his gender play refused to sustain him when novelty faded. Mark Bolan wasn't confused. He was intentional. His tragedy wasn't rejection, it was being consumed by a culture that loved his freedom but wouldn't protect the man behind it. They didn't hide because they were ashamed. They hid because exposure came with consequences. Some survived by performing versions of themselves. Others paid with isolation, addiction, or disappearance. The music changed the world, but the world wasn't ready for them. These stories aren't scandals. They are warnings. In an industry built on rebellion, the most dangerous act was telling the truth.